In 1942, a group of commandos set out on a daring raid to stop power production at a power plant in German-occupied Norway.
The commandos were set up to do hit-and-run raids.
They knew that the chances of the raid succeeding were small, and the chances of them surviving and getting back to the UK even smaller.
I believe that the top branch had a little understanding that this would be a one-way mission for a lot of them.
Surrounded by breathtaking landscape on the way to sabotage a power plant used by the Nazis, Operation Musketoon was highly dramatic, but the raid was never well known.
I didn't know a lot about the incident in Norway until it came out in the conversation one day, because he never really spoke about it.
The commandos were formed in 1940. That was just after Dunkirk, and the whole idea of the commandos was to, should we say, delay what was the expected invasion. So the commandos were set up to do hit-and-run raids. When they were first formed, they did their training in the north of Scotland. Now the training they underwent was exceptionally involved. They were trained on everything. They were trained on weapons, demolition, mountain climbing, crossing rivers, building rope bridges, hand-to-hand combat.
At the time, commando raids were small-scale raids done by groups of highly trained men.
He's joining like the special services, you know, you might have felt a bit of an elite thing to do, to be asked to go and do a thing like that. Probably didn't take the consequences of being captured or what would happen, you know. It was just I'm only guessing, but he might have taken it as a bit of an adventure.
The group of commandos was led by Canadian Captain Graham Black and consisted of British commandos Joseph Houghton, Cyril Abraham, Eric Curtis, Reginald Maycamp, William Chudley, Miller Smith, John Fairclough, Richard O'Brien, Fred Trigg, and Norwegians Erling Dutrat and Sverre Granlund, with Granlund having knowledge of the area and the lay of the land after being there to scout it out before the raid.
This was a new kind of warfare, I must say. So instead of hitting harder, instead of having more and better equipment yourself, you saw to that they had less equipment and poor equipment, and then yours of course would have been better. The goal was to take out the power plant in Fyka. The power plant was supplying the industry in Glomfjord with power. It was making aluminium for the German war machine, so they wanted to stop them. This wasn't the first attempt they had. Actually, the first happened the 12th of September the year before. 5 Albacore planes took off from the aircraft carrier HMS Victorious and flew in through the Glomfjord and dropped the bomb on the power plant and the factory. They missed, but 2 men lost their lives.
German control over these resources was a scarier threat to the Allied forces than the risk of being captured.
When I think back now, I think it's a very brave thing to do, you know, because it's not as if you were like in this day and age you could go on a raid like that and you'd have backup, you'd have helicopters could come in and you'd get a landing zone, you get a pickup point where they could come in quickly. There was no helicopters then. They were more or less told, I believe, that once they were in, they were on their own.
The way the commandos worked, they weren't in army barracks. Because if they were in army barracks, if all of a sudden a whole load of them went missing, people would know there was something on. So they were billeted with families in Scotland, 2 or 3 in a family, so only 2 or 3 would disappear at a time and it wouldn't be noticed. And my father was billeted with Fred Trigg, and the way it worked, even my father didn't know. He said he woke up one morning and Fred had gone. When they went to do the one in Norway, they started at Scapa Flow because that was where their submarine base was. And they went by submarine to the fields and stayed submerged in the fields until nighttime.
Originally, the commandos were supposed to row to land in Ørnes, but when scouting out the area, Granen had seen that they would have had to walk through populated areas and past the German prison camp to get to Fykan. So Genoan brought them to a different fjord, Bjerangsfjorden.
A lot closer to land that the captain really wanted. And they boarded a rubber boat to get in and rowed into land. About midnight at the night between 15th and 16th of September.
When they got to land, the commandos started a long walk towards Fykan, walking up steep hills surrounded by breathtaking landscape.
It's not like you're walking up the mountain, you're crawling up the mountain. And they had heavy backpacks with about 30 kilograms of weight each. They crossed a part of the Black Glacier, or the Svartisen, over to here, and they had a rest here. At this point, at this place, they lived for a couple of days under a rock or under a hill. They often went down here, a couple of 100 meters down the mountainside, to observe the power plant.
Vi gjorde et par forsøk først med å komme ned til stasjonen. Det ble stoppet av noe aktivitet oppe på Fykanberga. Jeg tror det var en fest eller en sammenkomst som var mye folk.
On the night between the 20th and the 21st of September, the attack started.
Så tok de seg ned, og så gikk de inn den inngangen som var på en av kraftverket, så langt som det var. Det var en provisorisk inngang med en stor trelemda. Og så lå det masse utstyr igjen da, for det var jo utvidelse av stasjonen. Så tok de seg inn. Et gjeng gikk innover hit, og så opp til stasjonen for å sikre området. Og der ble de jo litt overrasket da. Og blant annet så var det jo også en tysker da, som holdt vakta nede i ledningstunnelen. I tillegg så var det montører som bodde oppe med familie da, og folk som bodde med familie oppe i etasjen her.
When they come into the room where the tunnel is, they met a German soldier sitting on a chair. He wasn't fast enough, so Granlund took his pistol and shot him.
The commander sent the civilians at the power plant through a cable tunnel leading away from it to the nearest village, Glomfjord. Then they threw some smoke grenades into the tunnel to halt reinforcements they knew would come.
Så det var ikke helt sånn som de har forestilt seg, så de hadde ikke helt kontroll på situasjonen. Men når de har fått det da, så la de på sprengladninger opp på generator 1, 2 og delvis 3 da, og ble også lagt sprengladning på, men den gikk ikke av.
Whilst one group was inside the plant, O'Brien, Maycam and Djupdret went up the pipelines to place explosives there.
We're lucky in that sense that one of those who placed the bombs got back to England after the operation, so we have his report.
All through the commando training, he was trained with the explosives. That was his part in the raid to blow the plant up. He had to traverse across the rocks to get the explosives in position. So there's always a chance of, at night, in the dark, clambering over cliff faces. You can't be carrying 85 pounds or whatever it was of high explosives.
After the explosion on the pipes, water streamed down the mountainside and flooded the power plant.
Det jo en sikkerhetsmekanisme helt på toppen, altså en rørbruddsventil. Og den skal jo gå igjen hvis det blir brudd på røret og mannhastigheten øker. Men jeg tror at den ventilen han var hengt opp og låst, så han vil ikke klappe igjen. Og det tror jeg på grunn av at kraftstasjonen var tenkt bomba, eller han var prøvd bomba året før. Og etter det så ser jeg i rapportene på de som satt på brettet her, at de testet den ventilen 3 ganger i uka. Og når de testet ventilen, så må de henge den opp, og så løser de ut med en utløserknapp da. Og så ser de at han går litt ned, men han lukker ikke da, for det jo drift på kraftverk. Så jeg tror de har glemt å avsikre den ventilen, derfor gikk han ikke igjen. Nei, du kan si at skadene fra selveste sprengingen, de var ikke så store. Det som ble skadet her, det var alle de massene som kom I forbindelse med rørbruddet da.
Although the commandos had successfully stopped production at the power plant, the mission was far from over for them.
The escape of the commando missions were often not very well planned out. So when they were sitting up in the mountainside, looking down the station and planning the attack, they also planned the exit. They found out that Fyrkantrappa, which is a quite known wooden steps in Glomfjord, it was made in the early 1900s for workers to get equipment up the mountainside. They had seen this in binoculars and found out that they would try to escape this way.
To get to the stairs, the commandos would have had to cross a river, but they struggled to find a bridge across it and enter the working hut to ask for help.
Granlund had gotten there first and got into the working hut and actually got some help from a man named Ole Ellingsen, drew him a map, and he was outside trying to make sense of this map in the landscape. At this point, Horton and Djuptret reach in, so it's a bit far behind him. They couldn't either understand the map, so they decided to go inside the working hut.
They leave the hut, and some German soldiers enter it without the commandos seeing them. Djuptret and Houghton re-enter the hut, where Djuptret gets stabbed. He dies in hospital a few days later.
What we basically see is the party starts to break up in two groups. There's a lot of confusion going on. We've had the two explosives, 10 past midnight, then half an hour later, and then we have the commanders being in different positions because they've been carrying out different orders, regrouping, and they're trying, basically in summary, they're trying to make their way across the ravine. They're trying to then head north and scale what I refer to as the Navavan mountain and make their way either east to Sweden or head further north and then east over to Sweden. But the party effectively breaks up.
At this point, the fog of war gets very thick. It's hard to see what happens at this point, but Granlund and four of the others started walking up the valley. It was him, and it was Fairclough, Trigg, O'Brien and Miller-Smith. But as they got up the valley, Miller-Smith was asked to come back because he was the company sergeant major tasked to take care of wounded soldiers. At this point, O'Brien would have been their commanding officer. So he told them to ditch all their equipment and eat all their food and run up the valley.
The group make it up the mountain, but end up splitting up. Trigg and Fairclough make their way to Sweden and then back to the UK together, and O'Brien and Granlund get there separately.
I believe he got away, he managed to get to the Swedish border, where two Swedish border guards found him.
Those that are successful head north, those that ultimately are unsuccessful head south. They head up the mountainside. You've got Houghton with his silenced machine gun and others with their Colt 45s trying to buy time as they make their escape and try and pin the Germans down. The Germans are firing blind black at them. It's not in the dead of night at this stage, it's starting to get slightly light, but again, they move their way up, they're on the south side of the ravine, and they effectively come to an area on top where they don't know that part of the territory. That wasn't their original escape plan. And ultimately in Sandy, it's about 8:30 in the morning, there's about 50 Germans at that stage that actually surround them and take them prisoner. They'd expended all their ammunition, they could see that they were surrounded on all sides and they didn't really have a choice.
The commandos that have been taken as prisoners are marched down to Fyrkan to be transported across the fjord to Glomfjord.
It said that Black could actually see the destruction. He couldn't work out. They knew that the water should have shut off after 15 minutes because there was actually an automatic shut-off valve. And again now, hours later, the water's still pouring down and they can see the absolute destruction.
In Glomfjord, the commandos were brought to the local school building before being transported down Europe to Kolditz in Germany.
Housed in Kolditz is what's called a Straflager or a Sonderlager, a punishment camp or a special camp. Not punishment as in work parties or fatigues or things like that. It's punishment because you're put there because you're deemed to be the ultimate escapers. So what's happened on the way is the two officers get separated from their men on the journey. And then when the officers arrive at the town, they're put in the overflow solitary confinement cells down in the town. The other men, they're actually taken up to the castle.
This kind of warfare was new, so the Nazis didn't know what to do with the commandos they had taken prisoner.
The Führer didn't like that kind of warfare. It meant it was not proper warfare.
As you can see from Curtis's diary, he says one day we're told, this is before they got to Colditz, one day you're going to be shot as a saboteur, next day, no, you're afforded POW status, and they give equipment to shave.
After being held in Colditz for a while, the commandos were taken to Berlin.
Well, first of all, they're interrogated in the cells near the Gestapo headquarters, just off of on Prince Albrechtstrasse, and then we don't know what took place there. I think we can all imagine what may have taken place there.
At that point, Hitler came with a new law stating that all commandos who were captured would be executed without a trial.
And then they're taken up to Sachsenhausen, and then we think they were then executed at basically the next shooting block there.
First people who felt this law on their body were Operation Musketoon soldiers. Grey and Black was most likely the first one. So.
Well, I guess it was at that time, it was, well, like every war, it's a necessity at the time. We really didn't get too much information, but it was a sad time, especially for his parents, because he was an only child and a good boy.
This is the part of war that people don't realise. It stays with you forever.
The damages were big enough to temporarily stop power production.
Aggregat 1 her kom til drift til jula. Da var det aggregat 1 i drift. Aggregat 2 kom litt senere.
Resources to rebuild wasn't good enough anymore. So if this has happened in 41, let's say that the bombings were successful, the Germans would most likely just build it up again. But it's not what happened, but when it happened, that it's very important there.
Restoration of the power plant Glomfjord. In addition to the report by Dr. Lommel, the immediately arranged repairs after the attack were hurried along so that with great certainty, Machine 3 can restart on the 20th of November. Machine 1 and 2 will be started up electronically from the side of the generator, as the heavily damaged Pipe 1 will only make a turbine drive possible after a restoration in 6 months.
There was more produced aluminium in Glomfjord. It stopped there.
If you look at the impact that it made compared to the resources that were deployed, it seems hugely successful.
Although at the cost of the lives of 8 commandos, Operation Musketoon was ultimately remembered as a success.